At this meeting, we presented the final results from the COMFORT-2 study. If you remember, COMFORT-2 was one of a pair of studies which led to the approval of Ruxolitinib for the treatment of myelofibrosis. And the original results from the study were reported in 2012. We most recently updated them at 3 years, and at ASH 2015, we presented the final 5-year results from the study. So this represents a significant body of information now with Ruxolitinib. And if you remember, the study was for patients with primary or secondary myelofibrosis, intermediate 2 or high risk, randomised 2-to-1 in an open label fashion across Europe to receive either Ruxolitinib or what the physicians felt was the best available therapy, which for most patients was hydroxyurea. And the study basically had a primary endpoint of 35% spleen volume reduction, which was highly significantly met with Ruxolitinib and not with best available therapy. And in the update, we presented the results of the patients that were originally randomised to receive Ruxolitinib and those from the best available therapy arm who crossed over to receive the drug. What we've seen is some very significant and important data. So first of all, that we had 50 patients who remained on the study after 5 years. Now that might not sound enough, very many, but actually it's a lot of patients. And overall, as I said, is almost 500 years of patient data. We saw that the spleen response rate had fallen to just around 50% at 3 years, but really interestingly, at 5 years, 48% of patients had maintained their response. So that really suggests that there's a plateau of now 2 years from the last time we looked at the data. Importantly, if you remember, we also saw a survival advantage for patients treated with Ruxolitinib in the COMFORT-2 study. And when we look at 5 years, we see that compared to best available therapy patients, even though the majority of these patients, 45 of the 71, crossed over to get Ruxolitinib, there was a 33% prolongation of survival for those patients who received Ruxolitinib first. And then when you use a statistical model called the rank preserving structural failure time, or RPSFT analysis, you see that that survival advantage uplifts to 56%. And so that's a really important finding that would influence our practice. When we look at spleen volume reduction, we can see that the patients who crossed over to receive Ruxolitinib still had it, but they may perhaps have had it to a slightly lesser extent. And this, combined with the survival differentiation, even after 5 years, suggests that we should perhaps be considering earlier use of Ruxolitinib in myelofibrosis. But before moving on to kind of speculate on that, it's important to also reflect that the 5-year data from COMFORT-2 also showed no new safety signals and ongoing reduction in the kind of adverse events that we've observed across the study. So yes, we have seen some headache, we've seen some dizziness, we see infections, but these, generally the rates of these are decreasing over time. Specifically concerning leukemia, because this is something that of course we're all interested in, we've seen the same rates of leukemia in the patients allocated to receive Ruxolitinib compared to the control arm even at 5 years. So all in all, I think this is a huge body of data. It strongly supports ongoing use and safety in use of Ruxolitinib, and interestingly, these patients that are still responding out at 5 years. Concerning my point about early use of Ruxolitinib in myelofibrosis, I think there are 2 things that could be important to discuss. The first is early in 2016, the ReThink study will be launched, and this is a study specifically looked to ask this question. This study will recruit patients with so-called early myelofibrosis who have adverse molecular risk factors and randomise them in a double-blind, placebo-controlled fashion to receive Ruxolitinib or not. And that might well answer questions about progression. Also pertinent to this is data with regard to Ruxolitinib use in polycythemia vera, remembering that patients with accelerated phase of this disease progress to myelofibrosis as one of the features. And data shortly should be coming from the RESPONSE-2 study, which is the second large phase 3 study that Novartis have conducted with polycythemia vera and Ruxolitinib, so we should watch out for that soon.